Hey squad, how's it going? It's Gruber Troy here. We've had about 2.5 weeks now of PVE content available to us in Swords of Legends, and that is probably enough to kind of start forming our opinions on some of these DPS classes in PVE content. I wanted to rank these classes, and before I do that though, I want to say I think every class, again, like I said in the PvP video, every class is very well balanced. I think everything has the potential to top meters given the situation, but I think there are some classes that are just maybe enabled a little bit more on certain PvE fights, whether that be due to their mobility or them being a range class, not having to deal with some certain mechanics and stuff like that. So there are definitely areas where other classes excel and where some, kind of come up short. But yeah, we'll kind of be ranking these classes based around that aspect of PvE. So first off, let's jump into it, and I will be starting with the Spearmaster, and I think this class is a high tier class. They have a couple build options. They can do the heavy bleeding build to give them a lot of sustained damage, and I think this is usually the build that most Spearmasters end up playing in PvE content. But at the same time, they have very strong burst for maybe some ads come out and you need to quickly burst down these ads. They have options to get rid of or deal with those situations very well. On top of that, they have a lot of mobility, and therefore if they have to jump away from a fight or the boss, for example, they have the tools available to them to do that. So even though they are melee and they have a few more mechanics they have to deal with, they are able to actually get around those situations. Next up is the Slayer, and I think this class is low tier. The Berserker or Slayer has very strong burst and pretty good sustained damage even, but there's some situations where they feel a little more punished for being melee. The way that their charge build works is you have to charge up their Cloud Rippers for big damage, and there's just countless situations where you're charging up your Cloud Ripper and the boss just jumps away and you miss out on a lot of that damage and setup. They almost have to be aware of what is happening. However, they have really good cooldowns. Their burst damage is very, very good. I think they excel at bursting down packs of mobs. Like, that's kind of their niche, because their big cooldowns are on a pretty short cooldown. So if there are frequent ads that are constantly being summoned, I think you'll want a Slayer in your group to help deal with them, because their big AoE burst is usually up in around like 30-second intervals. But next up is the Reaper, and I think the Assassin Reaper is low tier. They're very similar to the Slayer in that they can deal a lot of damage. I have seen them top meters before. They are very good at executing with the way that Wheel of Frost works. You just kind of pool damage. But the issue is they are extremely cooldown reliant, and their cooldowns are very long, and their rotation is a lot more punishable. If you are using your cooldowns but you use them out of order, your damage is just neutered until your next cooldown cycle. So any class that plays like that and has a very punishable window for your big damage opportunities is going to suffer a little bit just due to the difficulty. But I do think Reapers are very good. I've seen them do very well. They're good in AoE situations. They do like solid sustained damage in AoE situations, but I think their biggest niche is kind of the execute phases. Next we have the Bladestorm, which is the Spell Swords melee variation, and I think this class is mid tier. Their normal build that I've seen revolves around damage over time, and they are almost like a hybrid ranged melee class where during some of their cooldowns or the way that their kit kind of works, they have like a change skill that basically transforms their melee attack or their melee basic attack into a ranged attack. And because most of their damage is coming from dots and now this ranged melee attack, which is weird to say, ranged melee, they're not as punished for backing away from bosses as some other classes might be. And therefore, because of that sustained damage, they just never really let up. They don't really feel like, I don't think they have any kind of mechanic that punishes them truly. Like, for example, the Slayer has Cloud Ripper, where if you miss it, you kind of miss out on a lot of that build-up phases and stuff like that. But for the Bladestorm, I think you're just able to constantly pump out damage, and therefore, you know, you're always cranking, you're always doing well. Next is the Sword Artist, which is the Spell Sword's ranged variation. And I think this is a high tier class. They have really solid mobility. They're able to cast while moving. They deal like a fairly consistent sustained damage. I don't think they have a ton of burst. So if a fight requires that, then maybe it's, you know, Sword Artist isn't really your thing, but they deal incredibly good sustained damage from what I've seen. They have a really good AoE, like mass AoE skill, and I think that's going to be kind of a little bit of their niche is sustained range damage and really good AoE options when it's called for. Next we have the Bard, and I think this is a mid-tier class, but it's kind of teetering between mid and high tier. I just don't really think it does anything like absolutely outstanding in terms of damage. Again, every class does really good damage, but I think like a Spearmaster does a little bit more, and the Bard is the only range class that is limited by like they can't cast while moving, I guess is what I'm trying to say. They're the only class that can't do that, and they are therefore a little bit less mobile and maybe punished for fights that require a lot of mobility. Their damage is there though, so they have really good burst if it's required, and I think their sustained damage is also pretty strong. So that's, you know, that's one thing to consider when bringing a Bard, is they're always going to be a solid option. They also bring the invincibility pills, which is in like a health buff that gives you like 6% HP or something like that. So they have decent utility. I think every group will at least want one Bard, whether that be a healer or a DPS Bard. But yeah, I think this class is teetering between mid and high tier. Finally, we have the Summoner, and I personally, could be wrong here, think that this is probably the best PvE class right now. I've seen them do absurd amounts of AoE burst, single target burst. They have incredible mobility. They can cast while moving. And they just kind of do a little bit of everything that you would want within a ranged class. You have the option to do everything without any kind of punishment. And yeah, from what I've seen, I think Summoner is extremely strong. They have two build options, whether that be the pet build, which is a little bit more sustained, I think, or you can do the what's it called? I think the damage revolves around like breaker seals and stone pylons, which is more of a caster variation. Both builds I've seen, and both builds have topped meters and done very well. So I think the build variation for the Summoner allows for a lot of versatility, whether you need that sustained damage for bosses or burst damage for AoE packs. So yeah, I think Summoner is just a very well-rounded DPS class, and it's ranged, so you don't really have to get away from bosses or any downtime, so you're just constantly pumping out your damage. But this is kind of my finalized breakdown of all PvE classes in Swords of Legends Online for their DPS variations. Let me know what you guys think about this, and again, I really want to emphasize, I think every class is very good and can excel. I don't really think that the high tier specs are that much farther ahead than the low tier. It's mostly going to come down to boss encounters and their mechanics that allow certain classes to excel where others might fall a little short. Yeah, let me know what you guys think. What classes do you play? How do you feel about your class in PvE environments? Would love to hear about it in the comments. But as always, I'm Goober Troy, and I want to say thanks for watching and remind everyone to squad up and have fun.